So fun fact, I'm a deaconess. I have been consecrated, it'll be 12 years at the end of this month, actually, that I've been doing this. So I thought it would be helpful because, now, I don't remember from the children's sermon, how many of you have heard the term deaconess before today? Okay, how many of you have met a deaconess? Okay. Where have you met a deaconess? Just out of curiosity. And Pastor Rick maybe, but for others? Buzz, where did you?
I've not met.
Oh, you haven't, okay. Did you say you have met a?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just in my home church.
In your home church? Okay.
I met you.
I met me.
Probably a different deaconess than what you're talking about.
Well, yeah, so that's the fun part. So I am a deaconess, not a deacon, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is, with the Lutheran Diaconal Association, based out of Valparaiso, Indiana. And my community is actually intra-Lutheran. For church nerds, that's really kind of a fascinating thing. I have deaconess sisters and deacon brothers that are ELCA, like us, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, as well as Missouri Synod brothers and sisters, NALC, and a handful of others. I think we have up to 7 different Lutheran church bodies represented within our community. And what makes that interesting is that we're independent. So we are not under the authority or the protection or care of any one of the church bodies. Now, if you know a little bit about those church bodies, there are some big differences within the Lutheran Church and things. So, but what we have said is like, yes, those differences exist, and we can talk some about those. But ultimately, our call to service is what unites us. And that we believe by being independent, that we also have some more flexibility. So for somebody like me, I was a stay-at-home mom with like a handful of volunteer things and whatnot for about 8 years. And I still got to be Deaconess Katie. Now, if Pastor Rick or somebody else on the ELCA roster would take that time, they would need to take a leave of call, and titles get a little wonky and messy. So that's a gift for us. We also can then serve in places where, you know, an official church worker might not be able to. So like I said, we've got people who are serving all over. I've got a fair amount of sisters that are public school teachers. One of which our pin she has tattooed on her upper breast because she knows that she cannot wear her pin in the school setting, but she wants to have it there with her. We have a sister who just retired recently, who was a librarian for Congress and was a researcher on tariffs. She fortunately retired a year ago and is now very glad to be out of that. So it's kind of a mismatch of who we are and what we do. But we're all formed in a similar way, so we all have some training. It is not through the seminary system, usually. Now that's changing some. I have my undergraduate degree in theology that let me finish those courses. Adult learners will either go back and do like continuing ed classes or maybe something through a seminary to get those requirements in. And then we also have practical training. So we've got to spend some time doing ministry. And that can look like working in a church. I worked in a church for about 1.5 years as family life and youth coordinator, meaning I was doing all of the youth ministry and preaching and leading on a regular basis. Tried that head on. It was not for me. But got to do that. Other people will like serve in a food bank or serve as a, I have a sister who's going to be consecrated soon that serves in a home for adults with disabilities, and that's her ministry, and that's how she's living it out. So there's all these different ways that come about it, and then at the end of that, we get consecrated, is the term for like when we're like moved on to like be our big pins, and we've got those pins that we wear, the pin that we wear that signifies that we are part of that community. So, and we had a question too of like, okay, so there's like ELCA stuff too, right? So within our church body, there's deacons now that are part of the roster who are like Pastor Rick and are like under the supervision, the call of the synod. And we have some of my sisters that are also deacons within the ELCA. We also have some, and we've got one right down the road, Deaconess Pastor Amanda Spangler serves as pastor and deaconess of, what's her church? St. Timothy, over in Hendersonville. So yeah, it's kind of a conglomerate of things, but the basic understanding is this idea of servant ministry. Makes a little bit of sense, maybe? Yeah. Okay, questions before, I've got a couple of different routes that we can go if you want, but questions or thoughts? Yeah.
Can you serve communion?
Can I serve communion? So I am not blessed by the synod to officially serve communion here. When I was serving in Ohio, I worked with the bishop and I had that authority. I don't have that now because it's blessed. It's doled out, for lack of a better word, by the bishop. I don't feel called to. That would be. Oh, now I'm totally blanking. Word and service.
Word and sacrament.
Word and sacrament.
That's me.
Yes, that's word and sacrament.
It's not the bishop, it's a church thing. I mean, he
Well,
doesn't have.
Yeah.
But he can authorize.
He could
He can
authorize. Yeah.
Right.
So by nature of being a deaconess, I do not have authority to oversee communion. Have I? Yes. Have I done it with the bishop's blessing? Yes. Have I done it at church camp with kids with a hot dog bun and grape soda without the blessing of the bishop? Yes. Do I believe God was present at all of that? Absolutely. Yeah. Anything else you want to say about that?
Anybody really can serve communion, and that's something I want to get started here. When we have leftover consecrated elements, you know, what we've done in the past, I mean, they're already consecrated, and, you know, just to, what's your name?
Lily.
Lily. You know, Lily, you could take those elements and go to see Bonnie,
No, Ashman's aren't here.
yeah, John left. You could go to the hospital, you know, and have a little liturgy that says these were just consecrated, whatever the words are, and then you can serve communion that way. And I can authorize that because it's already been consecrated.
He's already waved his magic hands.
I've
over it.
already raised the magic hand, said the wonderful words, you know, and it's all, yeah.
Yeah.
Gotta love politics.
Yep. Gotta love politics.
Well, it's not really politics.
Piety.
Yeah, it's all for good order.
It's all for good order. There's also some different understandings of call. Like I said, I know I am not called to word and sacrament. I am called to word and service. So I am called to preach, to lead. Like here, our kids, the intergenerational piece. When I hang out on the playground with my kids and then suddenly I'm having a mom pour her heart out to me about the difficulties, that's my ministry. And to serve. So that also looks like working here. For me, I joke some about the ministry of spreadsheets as somebody who is working with our budget and things like that. And in my day job now, I'm doing bookkeeping, and that's my ministry. Of making those numbers balance and make sense and tell the story of the organization is ministry. You know, for our sister that was the research librarian, you know, her presenting factual information to representatives, you know, there's no God in that intentionally, was her ministry. So it's a way of doing things. So it's a little bit different and a little bit more on the fringes rogue than maybe what a pastor could do. Yeah? Yeah?
So, as Christians, we're all called to serve. With that, a couple of questions. First one is, what were you able to learn in your training to become a deaconess that made a difference in your understanding of that? And second, what can we learn as lay Christians of how to be of service in our own life?
Yeah. So question is, what did I learn in my training to like kind of set apart a service, and what is we as lay Christians, what can we learn? Is that
Yep.
perfect? Okay. So in my training, a lot of it was, Bible basics, world religion, church polity, those kinds of things. So part of it is being able to speak the language, right? So that I can show up in places and be taken seriously is part of it, so that I can go and do that. The other piece that is very different for deaconesses, and particularly within our community, and you've heard me say community a lot, is that we are formed in community. So I had a mentor through my formation process that I worked with. I met with weekly to talk about what was going on, what was happening. She later then preached at our wedding and is still a dear friend. And I'm in community with women and now men that share a similar sense of call, so that we are united in this, so that we can grapple with this, that we can bounce ideas off each other, so that we can support one another, that we can call one another out when maybe we need to be called out or called in on something. That's huge. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts that deaconesses can offer to the world, is that we're not alone. I had my internship supervisor pastor referred to it as, we as pastors are kind of out there as lone wolves, kind of competing with one another, right? Because there's only so many Lutherans in a place typically, and like each church kind of needs their own thing, right? And there's a little bit of competition. If you want to see some competition too, seminaries and first calls is a fun place. So there's this inherent little bit of competition. There is collegiality, there is work among one another, but there's a little bit of a different understanding. We see our community as our gift in the way that we show up. Okay, so like there's deaconesses that knew that I was preaching this morning that were praying for me, right, and had sent some messages, which is special. I think that understanding is really important, and that resource is really important. So when I have a question about something or a wondering, in my personal life, in my professional life, or whatever, we're connected. We're connected online, we're connected with annual meetings in the summer, or physically together, and we come together to be fed, to learn, to do life together briefly, and then go out. In ancient days, deaconesses in the come from the German tradition, they actually lived all together in a mother house, more like nuns, and we keep a little bit of that within how we do. And I think for congregations, reclaiming that call to service as a living expression of the gospel is huge. It's one of the things that when Brad and I were church shopping was something that we were looking for. It's like, okay, how does this church show up not only here on Sunday mornings, but out in the community? And we do some really cool stuff. I think we've got some, room to grow and things in that too. But it's how do we live that out in our day to day, not just on Sunday mornings? So that is the ministry of spreadsheets. It's a ministry of being at the playground and having those conversations. It's a ministry of, showing up and all of a sudden you're hearing the store clerk's life story. I think that's all kind of in the mix. As far as practical pieces of where do we learn these things, right? There's resources and stuff online. I think having that deeper biblical understanding is really important. Having some of that theological and quite frankly church politics understanding what is this church and what are we doing is important and can help shape how we show up. I worked with international students for a number of years that were coming from across the globe to go to seminary, and multiple of them talked about how Lutheran Disaster Relief, which is the #1 disaster relief organization in the world.
The Lutheran Mafia.
yeah, the Lutheran Mafia, yeah, oof, showed up in their communities, and that's how they got connected. So like learning some of that stuff and seeing the interconnectedness, I think is hugely important. Yeah.
To just kind of piggyback on that a little bit, I think when you go out in the world as a pastor and you have a collar, there's immediate expectations, prejudices, whatnot, and an expectation that somehow that person is going to take charge and you all have to follow whatever this one says. I think
Your
that,
point.
I think deaconesses and deacons can go a little more incognito and do that work. And then when someone says, why are you here? It puts you maybe perhaps in a little better position than I would have to be able to articulate that. And as a role model, that's powerful.
Yeah, that would preach.
Katie, can I interrupt?
Oh, yeah.
Did
Oh.
y'all see all this stuff up here?
Oh, yeah.
She put, look, she's in it.
Oh, yeah.
So this is up here. I don't know if y'all noticed it. So
I
put it
forgot
up
to
so y'all
mention,
can see
yeah.
it.
There's some materials from my organization and the book that she held up, please don't judge that picture too harshly, was a book of sorts celebrating our 100th year as a community and kind of talking about some stories of call and the variety of call. And they did a whole photo shoot, and part of the thing was a Mary Kay consultant that came in and did our makeup. I don't wear makeup more than eyeliner, but Brad, I think, referred to it as mermaid eyes in there. So just gentle, and I was a couple of months postpartum with Holden. So it's funny that that's a picture that's lived on in Infinity now. But yeah, I do think the ability to show up and kind of be chameleons is huge. And I think that's one of the gifts of being able to pair word and sacrament ministry with this word and service, is that we're sharing that piece. But like I said, we're called out into the church, out or calling the world to the church, and also calling this church out there, and reminding that and being that emissary between those two places. Buzz.
Is the LDA deaconesses only?
Oh.
Okay.
Or are there deacons as well?
Yeah. So, this is like a heated thing. Okay, so the LDA is now deaconesses and deacons. We started consecrating men. Ben would be celebrating his 11th year now. So there is a small group of deacons that has started within my community. We're very separate. We're kind of Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. Where we have this umbrella of the LDA, but we have these two separate communities that are meeting. And there's been a long history of that. Part of how deaconesses got started was a place for women who were called into church leadership to have a place. Because for many, many, many years, and in lots of places still, women aren't allowed to do this. So deaconesses were kind of like a place for the women to come, and do their thing and to serve quietly over here on the sidelines. That's changed, fortunately, in a lot of places, and there's still places where that I personally believe, needs to be relooked at. So, our community formed for these women, okay? Then, as women were becoming pastors and things were changing, right? There were all of a sudden these men that were saying like, well, hey, I kind of want to do that. I'm not called to this, but I'm called to something. So we wrestled, and we as a community wrestled. Fights. You want to talk about church politics? Like, oof, it got heated. And it was hard too, because there is the question of, okay, if a pastor comes in or a man comes in and is going to have this voice, are we going to lose what's special to us? Right? Are we going to suddenly not have the power that we have? And there's been discussion about it. There's still ongoing discussion. One of the things in my community of deaconesses, we make decisions based on consensus. So meaning we all kind of have to either be on board or be willing to stand aside but there's no yes or no votes. If somebody is saying no, we say, okay, we'll wait. We'll see where Spirit guides us. So yeah, it's interesting. We also, like I said, we've got Amanda down the road who is a pastor deaconess. When women were first allowed to be ordained within the Lutheran Church, there was discussion too of like, okay, well, if women can be ordained, do we still need deaconesses? Do we still need that place? And we decided, yes, we still need that place. Then the decision came with Norma Cook Everest, who's a famous theologian, works at a Wartburg seminary, famous within certain circles. She was a deaconess and then felt this call to ordained ministry and said, okay, community, do I have to leave? Can I do both? We wrestled. We fought. We wrestled some more. And ultimately we decided that, yeah, you can do both. They're complementary. So now we have pastor deaconesses. We have assistant to the bishops that are deaconesses. Actually, she just left because now she's working for the LDA. But yeah, so there's all these different roles that have come along, and we as a community have wrestled to see like, okay, does this work? And then so far, we've always come on the side of like, yes, we can adapt. We can open up to do that. So yeah, I think right now we're at 12 men, and we've got about 400 deaconesses that are serving across the world. To put that in perspective, the ELCA has a community of deaconesses who are independent from us. They have about 88 deaconesses in the world. And the Missouri Synod, I think they're at just under 200 deaconesses. So it's a small but mighty group. The ELCA also has deacons, so they combined a whole bunch of rosters and church politics stuff into one single roster that's deacons. So that's like, you might have heard associates in ministry or diaconal minister or associates in music ministry. That all came from church divisions and revisions, and now they're all united under the title of deacon. So we also have deaconesses who are deacons.
Yeah, I knew one of those in Alabama.
What?
I knew one in Alabama.
A deacon, or a deacon, deaconess? Oh, a diaconal minister? Yeah. What did they do? To put you on the spot.
I mean, they were in training at the time.
Okay.
They moved on to serve in their own church, which also had a pastor.
Yeah.
They had an assignment almost like a church call.
Yeah.
Kelly was involved in the evaluation
In the
and the training,
evaluation,
so
yeah.
she knows a lot more about it than I do.
Yeah. So, and for the ELCA diaconal ministers, that is a master's level program. So they go through seminary or something similar and then go through candidacy through that. We, in the LDA, are all kind of internal with that piece. So we've modeled some of it after, like, we have to have a psych eval. We have to meet certain requirements and background checks and all of that jazz, but it's not within the larger church body. Yeah? Other questions? Or we can talk about images?
Just something I'm curious about.
Yeah, go for it.
Since in some of my work, I work with people with all different backgrounds, and that includes different gender orientations. I'm wondering how you split up who's a deacon, who's a deaconess, and if there's a third or fourth identity to cover some of the other identities.
So within our community, we have 3 folks that I know for sure are identifying as non-binary right now. 2 of which were consecrated as deaconesses and continue to hold the title deaconesses and are part of the deaconess community. There's one student who is in formation, and we're kind of waiting to see what Chris decides to do and what community suits them and what title they want to hold. It's definitely something that is in the air and trying to figure it out. And as you might imagine, having a community that is as pan-Lutheran and as widely on the political spectrum as we are, it's not easy. And we've got people with really strong feelings on both sides. As the central piece, the LDA that's educating and forming these people, we're walking with them closely and trying to figure out what that looks like. It's messy.
Yeah, there may not be just one answer.
No, and there's some talk of like a third roster that would go in between, not ELCA roster, but an independent roster. Other questions?
Are deaconesses like pastors, they never retire?
No, we kind of die. So one of the things that we do is every summer we have a annual meeting. So everybody is welcome to come and join within the community, and we gather together. And one night is anniversary celebrations, and we celebrate like 5, 15, 25, 30, 35, and then every 5 years from there. This last year, there was a woman who attended for her 50th anniversary of being a deaconess. And she was a executive director for Habitat for Humanity, and talked about that, and talked about how she continues to serve in her retirement community now, and things. So, and that's the other piece of not having a called job, but having a called identity, is that, yeah, we serve throughout that time. One other thing to note is that, so I became a deaconess with my undergrad degree, but as a bug to put in other people's ears, potentially, for yourself or others, we train people of all ages and in all stages of life. Again, because it's not a job, there's this flexibility to come in, and there could be a stirring of like a sense of calling, a sense of purpose, and maybe needing something more than just being the really cool volunteer at your church, right? Or being, but needing a more theological sound grounding, some community, some reflection on that. So there's a woman who's being consecrated in 2 weeks who is in her mid-60s and retired, and is a grandma and is starting her call. She was an engineer for a number of years, and a yoga instructor, and now runs a food pantry out just outside of Chicago as her ministry. And she, for her consecration project, wrote a yoga sequence, a prayerful yoga sequence that she uses and has invited others to use as a daily meditation. And that's how she's like wrapped up her diaconal calling in a cool way. So what's hard and beautiful is that it's kind of ambiguous. There's lots of different ways to show up as a deaconess. It's not one piece. But what's neat about that is that we get all different brains, all different kinds, to come together and say, like, no, this is cool and central to what we do. Yeah.
Is there a hierarchy person or people that decide if what you're doing is worthy
Of the call?
you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Good.
Yes. Okay, so the question is, like, is there a hierarchy, and like who's checking to see credentials, right? Who's doing that door kit tending
Yeah.
piece of things? Yeah. So the way that we're set up is there's the Lutheran Diaconal Association, which is is located in Valparaiso, Indiana. They are the ones that, like, the head organization that forms and sends folks out into the world. So in order to become a deaconess, you've got to go through that. You've got to go through, it's a pretty intensive process with a lot of checks and balances, and there's multiple committees that meet, similar to a candidacy committee, meet throughout the process to be like, okay, yes, Katie's got these things, okay, we can move on to the next piece. Yes, those requirements are completed. And yes, there's a sense of call and a good understanding, and we want to send this person out into the world. So there's that organization. Then once consecrated, we go into the Deaconess community, called the LDC, Lutheran Deaconess community. And in that group, we have a board. We also have committees that work with folks. And there's not so much a call of like, ooh, Katie, you haven't attended church in so many weeks, or, haven't done anything that we'd officially call, ministry. So we're gonna talk and maybe, take away your title. But what there is local deaconess conferences, like little areas that meet and talk and hold each other accountable. There are opportunities where people are checking in. So it's less stringent, which is part of the joy and challenge of it. If Pastor Rick was suddenly off doing something different, the synod would have his head and probably have some words and, change some things. For us, because it's not that centralized, it's a little bit more ambiguous. But I will say we call each other to task pretty well. We hold each other accountable, and calling in and calling out people who need to be called in and out. Does that answer?
Yeah, another question that just popped into my head is what you said earlier, that you were going to explain why you kept your deaconess self kind of on a low key.
Yeah. So Brad and I moved here a while and, took a minute to find a church and things. And we moved here from Chicago. And there in Chicago, I was working for the seminary in Chicago and fairly forward facing. So people knew who I was. So if we came into a congregation, there was one congregation we came in and they were like, oh, you want to be on council? We were visiting the first time. Okay. And we've had other issues of oh, well, you can come in and do all of this for us. And it's well, no. I want to come and learn you all first. So when we started searching down here, especially having the kiddos, it was okay, we're going to kind of be quiet about it. I think I had asked something to Pastor Rick early on about why we were doing a certain creed or something, in the first couple months that we were here, and he's there's something there. And so I outed myself then, kind of quietly. But part of it is doing that cognito work of, not wanting to do this every week, not being called into this, not being called to lead everything, but also just showing up. I also, for me personally, it was important to be able to be Katie, to be Ezra and Holden's mom first, before being Deaconess Katie or anything like that. And I know for a lot of others too, there's that balance and that struggle. And two, for part of it is, Pastor Rick is wonderful and great. There's other pastors that get really territorial. If you've got somebody who's coming in with some theological education and awareness and connections, if you've had somebody come into your job that was also doing it, but, there can be some tension. So part of it too is figuring that out and learning that. That was never a fear after a couple of conversations with Pastor Rick, but it can be.
Sure, absolutely.
Absolutely, Pastor Rick says. So that's part of it. Yeah, and part of it's an internal thing too. I was, when I left Chicago, I was running the administrative side of the PhD program there and international students, and was kind of high rolling and doing some really cool stuff within the ELCA. I came here following Brad and his job, so there's a little bit of an identity crisis of being the trailing spouse. I wasn't expecting to be a stay-at-home mom. It was the best thing ever, but it was not in the plan. And 20-year-old Katie, I think, is still what are you doing? So yeah, that's all part of it. And then now, as the boys have grown, as we have found our place in here, as I've continued to show up and been loved and supported and challenged in beautiful ways in this community, it was like, okay, maybe it's time. Maybe it's not. We'll see.
We're glad you did.
Thanks. Yeah.
So, as I look back, I'm retired now, so this
Uh-huh.
doesn't help anymore, but in my career, it took a long time to figure out how the calling of the work mixed with, how do I carry that out as a Christian? And it sure would have been nice to have somebody who's got some expertise in that to talk to. Because it took me a long time to get my bearings.
Yeah.
What do you do when you have to lay people off? What do you do, how do you deal with different kinds of issues that come up? Treat them with dignity. How do you make sure that the people at the bottom of the ladder feel recognized? All of those things, it would have been really nice to have
Yeah.
a coach.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think for me personally, my mom would tell the story that I was 4 or 5 the first time I said I wanted to be a pastor. At that time, I wanted to be a pastor and a neurosurgeon. My mom said, if you need a pediatric, my sister was having some issues, she's totally fine now, but if you need a pediatric neurosurgeon, you probably also need a pastor, so you can do both. Chemistry quickly showed me that was never ever going to be my route. So there's always been this sense, right, of like calling, of like, I'm called, like I like being a church, I like being a pastor, but like I want something more. So when I went to undergrad, I started with youth ministry. It's like, okay, that's the other option, right? Like if you're not going, and I'm not musical, you don't want me holding any kind of tune ever. Ezra, I think, is the only person who's ever asked me to sing to them. So I was like, okay, what do I do? All right, youth ministry, because that's the next, like, there's a few categories out there. And I did that for a while, and I figured it out. But then I also, like, have always had this mind of, like, grew up in a very business-oriented family. Like, I love spreadsheets. I love the organizational piece. I love thinking about systems and things like that. I'm weird in that way. And the deaconesses were like, well, yeah, you can do both. Being able to organize, to think processes, and do that in a way where we're caring about who's at the bottom of the ladder, about what story that is telling, that is ministry, right? And it doesn't come overnight, and I can tell you all of that. I can tell you what your jobs are in ministry, but sometimes it's like, it takes a while to live into that and to feel that. And I think having mentors and community members who have like lifted that up, and having that lifted up here too, even as I'm doing it without the deaconess title, just like, oh yeah, I kind of know some of these things, is invaluable. And I think as a congregation, that's one of the things that we can really do. I was talking to Martha Harris recently, about like, okay, like what kind of help does Don need with his, property ministry? Like changing the light bulbs is ministry, because if we're in the dark, can we do this kind of a thing? But it's a mindset change, which is not always easy, and it's not what the world tells us often. Other thoughts? Yeah.
So how can we support deaconesses in our church, such as you?
Yeah.
It works both ways, I'm sure.
Thanks for asking. There's information over there about the organization. I think being aware of that, as you're talking and thinking with people, recognizing that ministry is not just what happens here on Sunday mornings and what Pastor Rick does, but it's a calling of the whole church is huge. Being able, I love on our prayers when we pray for pastors and deacons and deaconesses, and, like, using those words is important. Financially, the LDA will gladly take your funds as we educate and inform people. It's huge. I think also calling in others to say like, and naming it as ministry is hugely important. And I think something that, you know, as language and as dialogue among us that we can adjust and change. Does that
Kind of.
kind of?
It's a sort of topic that maybe requires some thought and coming back to it.
Yeah. How to support me personally is like, you know, I'm happy to do this kind of stuff and support me, and then also help me listen to when Brad says like, no, too much. Yeah. I think knowing the names, knowing that that exists, lifting that up in places that need it, you know, there's not everything requires a pastor. A pastor is not suited to do everything the best all the time, but in our current church structure, that's, you know, the typical one, or, you know, maybe there's a church administrator or musician, but in our churches that are shrinking and budgets that are shrinking and shrinking, you know, that's going to be the role that you keep. Yeah? Do we want to, I don't really have time to go through images. There's 5 images. Is there anything else you want to say, Pastor Rick?
I think there's a wonderful connection.
Yeah.
I mean, we serve.
Mm-hmm.
I heard what you said earlier, there's more ways. And we need to find more ways because our world needs to see the gospel in action. And the only way they're going to see that, as I said at the communion, you get fed to go out to serve. I got a wonderful story that I'll wait for maybe next week's sermon, that I had an interaction with someone at Walmart this past week by just building a relationship. How you doing is serving.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, you know, and we just need to help us learn how to serve easily. Yeah, there's hard service.
Oh yeah, there's
Sure.
very hard service.
I mean, I'm gonna get with this woman and then maybe a couple people back there and another person or two to help me go to Kroger on Tuesday to pick up several cases of food, and then Thursday at Walmart several cases of food to start putting together 500 food bags, you know, for our schools. That's big serving, you know, and what can we do, little serving to make it easier? And it's just, how
Yeah.
are you doing today? You know, building
Well, and I think too, it's the intention behind the service. It's like, yep, here we're serving out of our abundance, and we're serving, you know, through the generosity of Thrivent and our members, that like, here we can do this, but it's also not just dropping off the food of like, oh, you poor people need this, right? But it's coming along and being in community with those people and being like, you know, having the good, like, I love the story of like the kids rejoicing over the good cereal, the name brand cereal, because our kids, you know, get excited when there's Fruit Loops and not Aldi Fruit Loops. Whatever,
But that's real.
that's real.
That is real. It's
And
taken
it's
me
giving-
a long time to understand that.
It's, yeah, and it's coming alongside people and giving them dignity, giving them
Right.
space to be,
Yeah.
is really huge. So yeah.